Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of me rambling on about something about Anthem on some blog or some part of the internet that you might not have seen or heard of. And in this case, it's the innocent or seemingly innocent Gamesradar. It's a typically fine website for gaming news. And we're going to go through a rather confused and uninformed journalist by the name of James Cole, or Jason Coles, and I don't know what the devil happened to this blog post. And we can take this perspective from a storytelling view. We can take it from um, just an average reader view, someone who is curious about Anthem and its story, or maybe you're actually one of those left or right leaning fellows who like to dabble with politics or even feminist perspectives. Who knows? I don't know why people would read an article like this, but it made me laugh in several ways. So it starts off titled "Before Anthem receives story DLC, Bioware needs to address its obsession with the male ego." That sounds very like a feminist perspective, right? Oh, the male ego. There's something wrong with the male ego. And then we'll see that this guy has no idea what he's talking about. And he believes his premise is that the male ego is dragging the storytelling down. Now, if you know anything about the story of Anthem, it's just not there. There's not much to go into. If I were to start analyzing it, I'd be looking at a framework for a story. It's like, oh, okay, there are characters, there are settings, there are conflicts. It's like, yeah, but there's no meat. There's nothing to actually taste for me to bother. I could, but it would be a waste of time. We wouldn't learn anything. And it's like, hey, look, there's a giant frame of a story that doesn't go anywhere and doesn't build on anything. So that's pretty much the point of Anthem, is nothing. BioWare is slowly turning Anthem around. He mentions some things about endgame content isn't where it is, the gameplay isn't there. But one thing he starts off with in this paragraph is, let me just read it. Before BioWare even thinks about expanding out the story of Anthem, it should really consider looking at the failings of the base game's narrative. Okay, good point. And of the instances of male ego that drive the story forward. Toxic masculinity, which ultimately works to the detriment of the story's core development and resolution. Now, this is clearly a feminist perspective, even mentioning masculinity and then putting toxic next to it. And it's like, oh, okay, this is going to be a very biased piece. It's biased for another reason, as we'll go through. But this is clearly a bad sign of someone who doesn't understand storytelling and applying intersectional femininity or feminism to this nonsense. You don't do this if you're trying to get to the root of the problem of the story. It doesn't work. If the story was more robust, it actually had depth, then you could take a feminist perspective and say, oh, okay, this is one aspect which we can zero in on, but it's not even there. So I'm not even sure why he started with that. And this goes into questioning the intelligence of Jason. Not to be offensive to Jason, but he clearly doesn't know what he's talking about. He's either out of his element or he's combining so many ideas. He's out of his league, really. So bereft of suspense, bereft of everything. This should be bereft of story in general, if I could change that word. If you played Anthem and through, by now you should be aware that it has 3 ego-driven characters. All right, so this is a huge, weird thing. No one who's ever analyzed a story that I've ever listened to respectfully would ever say a story has ego-driven characters. That's like saying your character walks with their feet. I am talking to you and you are hearing the words coming out of my mouth and you have ears to hear. It's like, yes, characters have egos. What's your point? It's the most bizarre way to start a conversation. It's like, do you know you're breathing? It's like, are you going to teach me how to breathe better, Mr. Meditation expert? I don't know. Like, what's the point of this? If you haven't yet completed Anthem, well, get prepared for a good number of spoilers. Yeah. As a result of this decision of ego-driven characters, the story is easy to read way ahead of time, stripping it of surprise and anticipation. No, there's nothing there. There's nothing to be surprised over. So it's not because of ego-driven characters, whatever those are. Frankly, we deserve better, of course. Bioware has always been one of the market leaders in storytelling. Not for the past 10 years, so no. And to have Anthem full of these annoyingly cookie cutter characters as characters that do exactly what you expect them to do. Cookie cutter characters have nothing to do with being ego driven. That's stupid. What you're talking about is stereotypes or flat characters or one dimensional characters. It's like, oh, it is evil bad guy. He is doing evil bad guy things. Or it is hero man. He is doing saving the day things. That's cookie cutter. It's very, very by the numbers, see it everywhere. There's nothing new. It's not because the characters are ego driven. It's because the story as a whole is garbage. Or it's not even there to comment on being garbage. So he describes 3 characters, Halleck, Owen, and the Monitor. The characters are all predictable in different ways, for sure. But they all drive the story from point to point with their egos. This is like saying a car gets from A to B by giving it fuel. Thank you, Jason. And to be frank, the male ego isn't inherently a bad thing. So this is strange. First, he took a toxic masculinity perspective, and now he's saying, well, you know what? It's not really toxic. There's nothing wrong with the male ego. First off, there's nothing wrong with the ego. You need an aspect of the mind to have a semblance of character, and ego is just a specific term related to. I've only seen it used in a psychoanalytic perspective of storytelling, where you're trying to identify the issues a character might be going through that aren't within the story on the surface level, or you want to understand the character more. So to have ego is pretty weak in a descriptor. To have a male ego is like, what does that tell you? The instincts or drives or desires of a masculine character, so sex, fame, fortune, I guess. Yeah, there is nothing wrong with that, but he started from toxic masculinity to saying, no, there is no toxic masculinity. It's okay. Like, then what's your point? Ego is useful for lots of things. It's not useful for writing a blog post about Anthem, that's for sure. As long as it's kept in check. What does this mean? That's like saying eyelashes are useful so long as they're kept in check. Like, what do you... After all, ego is generally tied to confidence, and confidence is good as long as you know your limits. The limits of my confidence? What? Ego. Let's see what ego is. Ego, the person's self-esteem or self-importance or sense of those. You don't use that in describing a character unless their self-esteem or self-importance is way, way low or something, or is absurdly high. This is what it's used for. This is the term it's classically used for. The part of the mind that mediates between conscious and the unconscious and is responsible for reality testing and sense of personal identity. That's what it is. And that's a very loose term in psychoanalysis. And you're not talking about Freud, you're talking about in general. And you only see it in regards to ego, superego, and id in the Freudian way. So for him to just say these things is just bizarre. If you don't believe you're capable of something, then you'll probably never try. This sentence is completely unrelated to this sentence. You could put this sentence anywhere in this. It just what. So ego, it isn't bad in and of itself. If it isn't bad, then why do you talk about toxic masculinity in your premise, buddy? An untamed ego, or the id, however, allows pride to get in the way of progress. What? Where is this coming from? Again, he could have said anything. An untamed ego, however, allows desire to get in the way of reality. But in this case, it's pride in the way of progress. If left unchecked, an untamed ego can be dangerous. I don't know what to say here. This man is rambling. Hubris replaces common sense. So now he's probably going to talk about pride before the fall with Halleck, and who else is here? Owen, when he betrays you, I think. Who else is next? Oh yeah, the classic villain, the Monitor. So he's talking about pride. Nothing wrong with that, but forests, trees, he doesn't know what he's talking about. The very epitome of a classic villain. The epitome. To say the Monitor is the epitome of a classic villain, how do I wrap this around my brain? The word epitome is not used to describe the Monitor. The epitome of something is a person or thing that is a perfect example of a particular quality or type. The Monitor is not the epitome of a classic villain. He's the embodiment of a stereotypical villain, or just say he's the stereotypical B-movie villain, or Saturday morning cartoon villain, or poorly written character, because there's nothing to him. He's just bad guy. He's bad guy villain. The same way Corypheus was bad guy villain in Dragon Age Origins, although arguably Corypheus at least had more depth than this guy. So I don't even think Jason knows words right. It's just, I think he's trying to be a games journalist and he's just making an opinion piece and he doesn't know what he's saying. And it's laughable. It's just sad. His only interaction with you are entirely him judging you and finding you lacking. That could be said of any character, really. A character doesn't like your capacities, your abilities, and they're trying to bring you down so you could bring yourself up. Or bring the character up, bring themselves up. Yes, he's a stereotypical villain, not the epitome. Now, this isn't unusual in video games. In fact, it's pretty much a cliche. Well, in stories, his ego is so overinflated that he genuinely believes he can control creation. So how much must his mother have told him he was special? See, now he's getting Freudian, but he's not actually talking. He doesn't know the terms. He doesn't have the language of Freud or psychoanalysis or psychology. That is why this is a ridiculous blog post. This is so silly. I mean, part of me is laughing, but the other part's like, this is pathetic. This description of Anthem's characters. Because there's nothing there. No one would seriously look at Anthem seriously and go, okay, I got to look at these characters. There's so much depth to them. Why are they behaving this way? I don't understand. It's like, no, there's nothing there. All three of these characters are one-dimensional ego beasts. What the hell does that mean? What is an ego beast? It sounds as if the writer has created these characters and breathed life into them, and they're just this random, raw, unhinged character, and they're just animals. They're running around, banging their head against the wall, and just like, this makes no sense. That run afoul of the most predictable story arcs in recent memory. Yeah, since Bioware's last game, Mass Effect Andromeda. And then previous to that, Dragon Age Inquisition with Corypheus. Bioware's on a roll of creating one-dimensional ego beasts. All because they represent the exact same flaw. No. If the characters had a flaw, then we could identify with them. We'd be like, oh, we get where they're coming from. We have no idea what they're trying to accomplish. Aside from Owen wants power, and the Monitor wants power, and Halleck wants to be... He still thinks he's got it. I mean, Halleck at least has some level of motivation and depth to him, if you can call it that. Other than that, there's not much there. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you guys saw something in those other characters. I'd love to know, because if there is, I might have something to look at aside from a joke. They can't keep their egos in check. How do you know that? Is that a prerequisite for a good character? Is that like a common theme throughout? No one can keep their ego in check. It's like, I want to eat bread. I must eat bread, and nothing can stop me. I must go out to the baker and kill his family. But no, now that I've killed his family, he won't make bread. Oh, what have I done? Like, is that what you're talking about? Is their egos are so crazy that they can't get what they want, and they pay the price as a result. Okay, pride before the fall, right? Okay. It's not good enough to have this one thing driving the entire story forward. Anthem is a game desperately crying out for more complex characters, a more interesting and challenging narrative. Yeah, that's kind of the point. It needs a narrative. It needs something to worth look at, worth caring about, and it doesn't have that. The characters are part of it, but it's just one part, one aspect. Like the protagonist character is just not there, just a voice, and usually that works with Bioware games, but you need to have something else to drive the story forward. And the villain would have been a good take, but it's just too cookie cutter. The idea that men are so driven. Oh, he's trying to bring it back to male ego. The idea that men are so driven by their ego. How about female ego? How about female plots? Huh? What does male ego have to do with any of this? Just because they're masculine characters or male characters? I don't think so. That has nothing to do with being a man, unless it's specific about being in control and having power and I don't know, acquiring mates and resources. That could be considered masculine, but how is that also not a feminine perspective? Because you're in a world where you're trying to survive. So everyone's trying to survive, regardless of being male or female. So it's strange to say male, unless, of course, he has an understanding of psychology, like Freud, or some sort of classic understanding of what it means to be a male or masculine. So without that statement by Jason, I don't know what he's talking about here. And remember, it's not toxic masculinity, because he said it's not toxic. He thought it was toxic, but then he discovered there's nothing wrong with the male ego. It's just how you use it. That's right. It is how you use it. That's how you use anything in writing. So why male ego as opposed to female ego? We can have better characters than this, surely, of course. If any studio can deliver or will deliver excuse me. And if any studio will deliver them, it has to be Bioware. First off, will deliver is not true when Bioware is considered, and Bioware has not exactly had a track record in the past 10 years of delivering good stories. All right, whatever, his opinion. Thankfully, given that Anthem has been built so steadily evolve and expand over the years, Bioware still has time to show us that it is capable of building complex characters. Just because Anthem is one of those games where you update and you just keep going and it just gets updated, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get better. In fact, if anything, we've seen it's gotten worse. It hasn't been able to hit its goals. Its roadmap is lagged. And if they can't even get the basic mechanics of the game down, how the heck are they going to get storytelling with characters and cutscenes working? It's a little more difficult to create a good story than it is to create good gameplay. But they can't even get, like, this whole project is a mess. So for this guy to say that Bioware still has time to show us that it's capable of building complex characters and developing interesting stories, it has had 7 years to develop the game, and it hasn't done anything in terms of gameplay or storytelling. So I'm sorry, but unless Bioware turns Anthem around really quickly, it's going to die. It's going to die this year, and no one's going to be playing it. It has a lot to fix. Yeah, exactly. It has a lot to fix before we get our first major narrative expansion. And here's hoping the extra time. Again, he's hoping on a dream and a prayer. Anyway, I found this funny and disturbing on several ways. It seems as if Jason does not understand storytelling, a feminist perspective on narrative. I think journalism in general. This is like an opinion piece with no meat, and of course the lack of understanding of psychoanalysis. So I found this rather entertaining and sad. A little different for Anthem updates, but just go to Reddit. You'll be laughing and crying in equal parts if you give a crap. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time, and have yourself a wonderful day.